Vivienne knew 3 things in the span of a single breath. The carriage door was locked. The man across from her wasn't supposed to be there. And Julian was 2 cars back with no one to protect him. The stranger rose from the bench seat, like smoke taking shape. Tall, controlled, dressed in black that made the gaslight seem dimmer. And her body betrayed her before her mind caught up. Heart hammering, throat tight. Every nerve screaming danger even as something deeper, older, whispered stay. "You've run out of stations, Miss Caldwell," he said. And his voice slid under her skin in a way no voice ever had. "Marrow's men board at the next stop. You have until then to accept my offer, or I let them take what they came for." She should have been calculating escape routes, but all she could think was that his eyes weren't quite human. And Vivienne forced herself to breathe, to think. The door was locked. She'd felt both mechanisms slide home, one from inside, one from without. The window showed only darkness and the blur of moorland rushing past. The conductor was gone. And this man knew her name. Her real name, not the one on the ticket currently tucked in her sleeve. "Julian is in 3rd class," she said, keeping her voice level. 2 cars back. If you've done anything to him?" "Your brother is precisely where you left him," the stranger interrupted. And there was something almost amused in his tone. Sharing a bench with a clerk's widow and her 2 daughters. He's been practicing his Latin declensions in his head for the past 20 minutes. Amo, amas, amat. Her blood went cold. "How do you? Because I have someone watching him." He took a step closer, and in the space between them seemed to contract. "The same someone who will ensure Marrow's collectors walk right past his seat, assuming you and I reach an understanding." This was a trap, but Vivienne had walked into traps before, and the trick was always the same. Find the seam, find the lie, find the way the trap setter needed you to react. She straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. "Who are you?" "Duke Sebastian Wycliffe." He said it like he expected her to know the name, like he expected her to flinch. She didn't. "That tells me nothing useful." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or reassessment. He moved again, not closer this time, but to the side, circling like he was taking her measure. Vivienne tracked him with her eyes, refusing to turn her head. But predators liked it when you watched them too carefully. It confirmed you were prey. "You're practical," Sebastian said. "Good. That makes this easier." He stopped at the window, one hand resting on the frame, his profile sharp against the glass. "Gideon Marrow holds paper on you. Legal documents that say you owe him money, property, and 6 years of interest compounded monthly. He also has a magistrate's warrant that names you as guardian of a minor child, Julian Caldwell, acquired through questionable means." "Questionable means," Vivienne repeated, tasting bitterness. "Is that what they call a father's gambling debts now? Your father's debts died with him." Sebastian's voice was flat, clinical. "What Marrow holds is forgery, coercion, and fraud. But it's exceptionally well-constructed forgery. And the magistrate in question is exceptionally well paid." Vivienne's hands were shaking. She laced her fingers together, tight, and shoved them into the folds of her skirt. "You still haven't told me what you want." He turned then, fully, and the gaslight caught his eyes again. They were pale, gray, or perhaps silver, and they didn't blink often enough. "I want you to stop running." "In exchange for what?" "Your brother's safety. A roof over both your heads. Protection from Marrow and anyone else who comes looking." It sounded too good. It sounded like every trap she'd ever avoided, polished up and presented with an aristocratic accent. "No one offers that for free." "You're right." Sebastian crossed the carriage in 2 strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell leather and smoke and something else, and something that made her head swim and her pulse trip over itself. "I don't offer it for free. I offer it in exchange for your presence in my household, under a contract, for a term we will negotiate." Vivienne's throat tightened. She'd heard this offer before, in different words, from different men. The kind of offer that started with protection and ended with ownership. "I'm not interested in becoming anyone's mistress." His expression didn't change, but something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "I'm not interested in acquiring one. What I need, Miss Caldwell, is someone intelligent, observant, and very good at surviving impossible situations. What you need is someone powerful enough to make Gideon Marrow's paperwork irrelevant. He paused. We can help each other. The train rattled over a junction, the carriage swaying, and Vivian had to steady herself against the wall. Sebastian didn't move, didn't sway, stood there like he was rooted to the floor, and she had the wild, irrational thought that he could stand steady through an earthquake. Marrow's men board at Ashford Cross, she said quietly. That's 8 minutes from now. 7.5. And you're telling me you can stop them? I'm telling you they won't touch your brother if you agree to my terms. Sebastian tilted his head, studying her. You're trying to decide if I'm lying. You're also trying to decide if it matters, because your other options are running out of track. He was right. Vivian hated that he was right. She had 40 pounds left, one forged reference letter, and a brother who needed medicine she couldn't afford, and schooling she couldn't provide. And she'd been running for 6 years, and the only thing she'd gotten good at was staying one step ahead of the collectors. But this man, this Duke, he wasn't a collector. He was something else entirely. What are your terms? She asked. You come to my estate. You stay for a probationary period, let's say 3 months. During that time, you assist with certain matters that require discretion and intelligence. At the end of 3 months, if either of us wishes to dissolve the arrangement, you're free to leave with enough money to start somewhere Marrow will never find you. It was too neat, too clean. And Julian becomes my ward, officially, with paperwork that will withstand any legal challenge Marrow or his magistrate can manufacture. Sebastian's voice softened, just slightly. He'll have tutors, doctors, safety, and a childhood that doesn't involve sleeping in third-class carriages. Vivian's chest ached. She looked away, focusing on the window, the dark moors, the distant lights of Ashford Cross growing closer. You're asking me to trust you. No. Sebastian moved closer again, and this time she could feel the heat of him, the way the air seemed to thicken when he was near. I'm asking you to make a calculated risk. Trust is something we'll build or not build over time. She turned back to face him, and the proximity stole her breath for a moment. He was watching her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. I want it in writing, Vivian said. The contract. With exit clauses for both of us. Agreed? I want Julian examined by a doctor of my choosing. Reasonable. I want access to a solicitor. Independent, not someone on your payroll. Also reasonable. Sebastian's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. You negotiate like someone who's been burned before. I learn quickly. Good. He reached into his coat and withdrew a pocket watch, flicking it open. 5 minutes until Ashford Cross. Do we have an agreement in principle, Miss Caldwell? Or do I step aside and let Marrow's men do their work? Vivian's mind raced. This was insane. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he really wanted, didn't know if his protection was worth the price she'd pay for it. But Julian was 2 cars back, and Marrow's collectors would be boarding in 5 minutes. And she was so tired of running. One more question, she said. Sebastian waited. Why me? Why not just let Marrow take what he wants? What do you gain from this? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, you saw a tail at King's Cross, a man in a brown coat watching the third-class queue. You changed tickets, changed platforms, and boarded through the second-class entrance instead. You did it in under 3 minutes without alerting anyone. Vivian's pulse stuttered. She had done that, but she'd been certain no one had noticed. I notice things, Miss Caldwell. Sebastian's voice dropped, intimate and dangerous. And I need someone who notices things the way you do. Someone who sees the seams in systems. Someone who doesn't panic. You don't know I won't panic. You're not panicking now. He closed the watch and tucked it away. You're calculating, negotiating. That's what I need. The train began to slow. The lights of Ashford Cross Station burned bright through the window, and Vivian could see figures on the platform. 3 men, waiting. Sebastian followed her gaze. Those are Marrow's. The one on the left has a magistrate's warrant. The one in the middle has a cudgel. The one on the right has a knife. Her stomach twisted. How do you... Because I have people everywhere. He looked at her again, and his eyes were too bright, too focused, wrong in a way that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. Yes or no, Miss Caldwell? We're out of time. Vivian thought of Julian. Latin declensions and second-hand books, and the way he still had nightmares about the night their father died. And she thought of the 40 pounds in her pocket and the forged letter that wouldn't survive scrutiny and the collectors on the platform with their warrant and their weapons. She thought of 6 years running and how tired she was. Yes, she said, on the conditions I named, in writing, with exit clauses. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, satisfaction, maybe, or relief. Then stay exactly where you are. He moved to the door, unlocked it with a key she hadn't seen him holding, and stepped out into the narrow corridor. Vivian watched through the window as the train pulled into Ashford Cross, as Marrow's men stepped forward, as Sebastian descended to the platform and spoke 3 words she couldn't hear. The men stepped back, all 3 of them, like they'd been struck. Sebastian turned, looked up at the carriage window. Irene held her gaze for one long, unreadable moment. Then he boarded again. The train lurched forward, and Ashford Cross disappeared into the night. When he returned to the carriage, he was holding a leather document case. My solicitor will meet us at the estate. We'll have the contract drawn up by morning. Vivian's hands were still shaking. What did you say to them? I told them you were under my protection now. Sebastian sat down across from her, perfectly calm, as if he hadn't just made 3 armed men retreat with a handful of words. And that anyone who touched you or your brother would answer to me personally. And they just believed you? His smile was sharp and cold and not entirely human. Everyone believes me, Miss Caldwell. That's what makes me useful. The train rattled on through the dark. As Vivian realized she'd just made a deal with something far more dangerous than Gideon Marrow. She also realized she didn't regret it. Not yet. The Wycliffe estate rose from the moors like something out of a Gothic novel. All dark stone and narrow windows, surrounded by forests that pressed close on 3 sides. Vivian watched it approach through the carriage window as dawn broke gray and cold over the hills. Sebastian sat across from her, silent for the past hour, his attention on a stack of correspondence that had been waiting at the last station stop. Julian was beside her finally, pulled from the 3rd-class carriage at the last stop, and bundled into this one with barely a word of explanation. He'd looked at Sebastian once, gone pale, and hadn't spoken since. Smart boy. The carriage rolled through iron gates, tall, spiked, are newer than the estate itself, and up a curved drive lined with ancient oaks. Vivian counted windows, noted the stable block to the east, the walled garden to the west, the narrow service road that curved around to what was likely the kitchen entrance. Escape routes, just in case. There are 17 ways off the grounds, Sebastian said, without looking up from his letters. I'll have someone show you 12 of them. The other 5 are for emergencies only. Vivian's pulse jumped. You assume I'm planning to run. I assume you're planning everything. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were sharp in the gray morning light. It's one of the reasons you're here. The carriage stopped. A woman appeared on the front steps, tall, severe, dressed in black with a housekeeper's chatelaine at her waist. And she descended with the kind of brisk efficiency that suggested she ran this house the way generals ran campaigns. Sebastian opened the carriage door himself, stepped down, then turned to offer his hand to Vivian. She hesitated. His hand was bare, no gloves, and the last time she'd touched him had been never. Some instinct warned her that touching him would change something. Miss Caldwell, he said quietly, it's only a hand. It wasn't. But Julian was watching, and the housekeeper was watching, and Vivian had already made her choice on the train. She took his hand. Heat, immediate and shocking, like touching a coal still warm from the fire. Her fingers curled instinctively around his, and for a moment the world narrowed to that point of contact. His skin against hers, rough and warm and wrong in a way she couldn't name. And her breath caught, her pulse hammered at her throat, and beneath it all, something deeper shifted, like a lock turning in a door she hadn't known existed. Sebastian's grip tightened fractionally. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them that had no words. Then he released her hand and turned to help Julian down, and Vivian was left standing on the gravel drive, with her palm still burning. The housekeeper approached, her expression neutral, but her gaze assessing. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Pruitt." Sebastian gestured to Vivian and Julian. "Miss Vivian Caldwell and Master Julian Caldwell. They'll be staying in the East Wing under my personal protection. Miss Caldwell is to have every courtesy extended to a guest of the house." Mrs. Pruitt's left eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. "Every courtesy, Your Grace. Within reason. I'm Mrs. Pruitt. I trust your judgment on what constitutes reason." The eyebrows settled. "Very good, Your Grace. Shall I show them to their rooms?" "Please, and have breakfast sent up. Then send for Dr. Winters. I want Master Julian examined today." "At once, Your Grace." Sebastian looked at Vivian one more time. "My solicitor, Mr. Locksley, will arrive this afternoon. We'll finalize the contract then. Until that time, you're my guests. Mrs. Pruitt will see to anything you require." Guests, not prisoners. Vivian wanted to believe him. "Thank you," she said, because it seemed expected. Sebastian's mouth curved slightly. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Caldwell. You haven't earned your keep." Then he was gone, striding into the house with that same predatory grace. And Vivian was left standing in the cold dawn with her brother and a housekeeper who looked like she'd seen everything twice and been unimpressed both times. "This way," Mrs. Pruitt said. The East Wing was beautiful and utterly impractical. High ceilings, tall windows, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Vivian's room connected to Julian's through a shared sitting room, and both had fireplaces already lit. Beds already made with linens finer than anything Vivian had touched in 6 years. Julian stood in the middle of his room, staring at the 4-poster bed like it might bite him. "It's temporary," Vivian said quietly. "Remember that." "Is he going to hurt us?" Julian's voice was small. 12 years old, and he'd learned to ask that question about every new place, every new situation. No," Vivian surprised herself with how certain she sounded. "I don't think he is." "But you don't know." "No," she admitted. "I don't know." Julian nodded slowly, then sat on the edge of the bed, testing it. "Viv? Yes?" "The man on the platform, the one with the cudgel. I saw him looking for us." "I know." "And the Duke made him leave, just by talking." "Yes." "How?" Vivian had no answer for that. She crossed the room and pulled Julian into a brief, fierce hug. "Get some rest. Real rest. In a real bed. I'll be right next door if you need me." She meant it. For the first time in 6 years, she could leave Julian alone in a room and know he'd still be there when she returned. The weight of that realization made her throat tight. By the time Dr. Winters arrived, a brisk older man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers, Julian was half asleep on top of the bed linens, still dressed, like he was afraid to disturb them. The doctor examined him with gentle efficiency while Vivian watched from the doorway. "Malnourished," Dr. Winters said quietly after. "Not severely, but chronically. The cough concerns me. I'll send a tonic and recommend rest, good meals, fresh air, and time." He looked at Vivian with something like approval. "You've kept him alive under circumstances that would have broken most people, Miss Caldwell. That's no small thing." "Will he recover fully?" "With proper care, absolutely. The Duke's household is well equipped for this." The doctor packed his bag with precise movements. "His Grace requested I examine you as well." Vivian stiffened. "That's not necessary." He was quite insistent. "But of course, the choice is yours." She wanted to refuse. But Sebastian had kept every promise so far, and if she was going to survive here, she needed to choose her battles carefully. "Fine," she said, "but be quick about it." Dr. Winters was professional and thorough. He pronounced her healthy but exhausted, left instructions for a tonic she probably wouldn't take, and departed with a reminder that he'd return in 3 days to check on Julian's progress. By noon, Vivian was alone in a strange house with too many doors and not enough information. She needed to understand the contract before she signed it. Mr. Edwin Locksley arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, a thin, anxious-looking man with ink-stained fingers and the careful manner of someone who'd built a career on reading the fine print. He spread the contract across Sebastian's desk, while Vivian and the Duke sat on opposite sides. "The terms are straightforward," Locksley said, adjusting his spectacles. Miss Caldwell agrees to reside at the Wycliffe estate for a probationary period of 3 months. During this time, she will assist His Grace with matters requiring discretion and observation. In exchange, Master Julian Caldwell becomes a legal ward of the Duke, with all attendant protections, education, and medical care provided. And at the end of 3 months, Vivian asked, either party may dissolve the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. Upon dissolution, Miss Caldwell receives a settlement of £500 and letters of reference sufficient to secure respectable employment anywhere in England. Locksley glanced at Sebastian. His Grace has also included a provision that Master Julian's wardship continues regardless of whether Miss Caldwell remains in residence. Vivian's breath caught. You'd keep Julian safe even if I left? The boy's welfare isn't contingent on your presence, Sebastian said quietly. Though I hope you'll stay. She read the contract twice, looked for the traps, the loopholes, the clauses that would turn protection into ownership. But it was exactly what Locksley said. Clean, fair, with exit clauses that actually meant something. There's one more thing, Sebastian added. Mr. Locksley has prepared a second document, a legal challenge to any claim Gideon Marrow might make on you or your brother. It establishes that the original debt died with your father, as in that any subsequent agreements were made under duress and are therefore void. Locksley produced the second document. It was dense with legal language, but the intent was clear. Marrow's hold on them would be dismantled, piece by piece, through the courts. How long will that take? Vivian asked. Months, Locksley admitted. But in the meantime, this estate is outside Marrow's reach. The Duke's position provides substantial legal protection. Vivian looked at Sebastian. Why are you doing this? Because you're useful to me, he said. And because Marrow is a problem I intend to solve. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was honest, and Vivian had learned to value honesty over pretty words. She signed the contract. Sebastian signed it. Locksley witnessed it, blotted the ink, and tucked both documents into his case. I'll file these with the magistrate's office tomorrow. You're protected now, Miss Caldwell, both of you. After Locksley left, Sebastian poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed one to Vivian. To mutually beneficial arrangements. She took the glass but didn't drink. What happens now? Now you prove you're worth £500. The woman who found Vivian in the library that evening was not Mrs. Pruitt. She was older, 60 or so, elegant in deep blue silk, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She moved through the room like she owned it, which, given the family resemblance to Sebastian, she probably did. You must be the clever girl Sebastian's been talking about, the woman said. Vivian set down the book on estate law she'd been reading. As I'm Vivian Caldwell, Lady Beatrice Hawthorne, Sebastian's aunt. She settled into the chair across from Vivian, with the ease of someone long accustomed to claiming space. He says you notice things. Sometimes. Don't be modest. It's tedious. Lady Beatrice produced a folded piece of paper from her sleeve. He's asked me to test that claim. Interested. Do I have a choice? Of course. You can refuse, and we'll find out whether you're genuinely capable or simply lucky. Lady Beatrice's smile was sharp. But I suspect you'd rather prove the former. Vivian took the paper, unfolded it. 3 lines of text in Sebastian's precise handwriting. Someone in this household is selling information to outside parties. Likely suspects: the under-butler, the senior lady's maid, Peter Groff, stable hand. Your task, Lady Beatrice said, is to identify which one. You have 48 hours. And if I fail? Then Sebastian's initial assessment of your abilities was overly optimistic, and will need to reconsider the terms of your arrangement. Lady Beatrice stood. Mrs. Pruitt has arranged for you to be introduced to the staff as my new companion. It's a position that allows you to move freely through the house and ask questions without raising suspicion. Use it well. What kind of information is being leaked? Vivian asked. Arrival times, guest lists, the movements of certain people. Lady Beatrice paused at the door. And recently, details about a delivery scheduled for 2 days from now. If that information reaches the wrong parties, people could be seriously hurt. Then she was gone, and Vivian was alone with 3 suspects and a ticking clock. As she read the note again, under butler, lady's maid, stable hand. 3 people with access to different parts of the house, different kinds of information. She needed a plan. The next morning, Vivienne began her investigation. Mrs. Pruitt introduced her to the staff as Lady Beatrice's new companion, a position that required her to run errands, deliver messages, and generally make herself useful throughout the house. It gave her an excuse to be everywhere and notice everything. The under-butler was a man named Thomas, about 40, with the careful manners of someone who'd spent his life in service. Vivienne watched him manage the footmen during breakfast service. He was efficient, precise, and showed no signs of nerves. When she manufactured an excuse to speak with him about Lady Beatrice's preferences for afternoon tea, and he answered every question with the smooth confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. But when she mentioned that the Duke had guests arriving on Thursday, Thomas's expression didn't flicker. No curiosity, no reaction at all. Vivienne filed that away. The senior lady's maid was Mary, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and capable hands. Vivienne found her in the sewing room, mending one of Lady Beatrice's gowns with tiny, perfect stitches. They talked about fabrics and fashions and the challenge of maintaining a wardrobe in a drafty country house. Mary was pleasant, professional, and when Vivienne casually mentioned the Thursday delivery, Mary asked 3 questions: what time, what entrance, and would additional staff be needed? Normal questions for someone managing household logistics. Or questions from someone gathering intelligence. Vivienne couldn't tell which. By evening, she'd learned something about both suspects, but nothing definitive. She needed more time. That night, she dreamed of gold eyes and heat that burned without consuming. The second day of her investigation, Vivienne focused on the stable hand. Peter Groff was young, perhaps 25, with the kind of easy competence that came from a lifetime around horses. Vivienne found him in the stable yard, working through the afternoon grooming routine. She'd borrowed a riding habit from Lady Beatrice's wardrobe and invented a story about wanting to familiarize herself with the estate's mounts. Groff was polite, knowledgeable, and showed her 3 suitable horses for a lady's use. His hands were calloused from honest work, and his manner was respectful without being obsequious. But his boots were wrong. They were new, expensive London-made boots, with a particular maker's mark Vivienne recognized from her time working in a haberdashery. The kind of boots that belonged to a gentleman, not a stable hand earning £2 a month. And they were already showing wear at the heels and toes, the kind of wear that came from frequent travel, not daily stable work. "How long have you been at Wycliffe Estate?" Vivienne asked, running her hand along a mare's flank. 3 months, miss, came with references from an estate in Surrey. "Do you visit family often, on your days off?" Something flickered in Groff's expression, too quick to read, but there. "No family, miss. I keep to myself mostly." "Sensible," Vivienne said. "Travel is expensive." "That it is. Art, miss?" But his boots said otherwise. Vivienne spent the rest of the day watching. Groff left the stable yard twice, once to deliver a message to the main house, once to check a fence line near the eastern boundary. Both times he moved with purpose. Both times he took routes that kept him away from the main staff areas. By evening, she was certain. She went to find Sebastian. She found him in his study, the room on the first floor that smelled of smoke and leather and something else, something wild that made her pulse quicken without permission. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Miss Caldwell, I trust Lady Beatrice's test is proceeding well." "Peter Groff is your leak," Vivienne said. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. "You're certain?" "His boots are from London, expensive, at least 3 guineas. He's been in your employment for 3 months, and they're already wearing through. That means frequent travel." She moved closer to the desk. "The under-butler has secrets. He's having an affair with one of the kitchen maids. The lady's maid is skimming small amounts from the household accounts. But Groff's secret is professional, not personal." "How did you identify the boots?" "I worked in a haberdashery for 6 months in Winchester. You learn to recognize quality and read wear patterns." Vivienne met his gaze. "What will you do with him?" "Have him followed when he leaves tomorrow. Discover who he reports to and what information he's already passed along." Sebastian stood, moving around the desk. "Then decide whether to arrest him or use him to feed false intelligence back to whoever's paying him." He stopped close to her, are not touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Near enough that her body responded without her permission. Pulse accelerating, breath shortening, skin prickling with awareness. "You passed the test," Sebastian said quietly. "Was there any doubt?" "Some," his voice dropped. "You've been underestimated your whole life, haven't you?" Vivian's throat tightened. "Yes. That ends here. In this house, you will be seen for exactly what you are." He said it like a vow, like a promise he intended to keep regardless of what it demanded from him. It should have been arrogant. Instead, it felt like the first true thing anyone had said to her in years. "I need your help with something else," Sebastian continued. "There's a shipment arriving tomorrow night. Medical supplies for the estate. The route has been compromised, Groff's information, most likely. And I suspect there will be an attempt to intercept it." "Medical supplies?" Vivian frowned. Why would anyone want to intercept medicine? Sebastian's expression went carefully neutral. "There are people who would pay handsomely to know what kind of supplies I require, and in what quantities. The information could be damaging." It wasn't a full answer, but before Vivian could press, Mrs. Pruitt appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, there's been an incident." Sebastian's posture changed instantly, tension coiling through him like a wire pulled taut. "Where?" "The East Wing." A man forced his way past the kitchen entrance. "He has the boy." Vivian was running before Mrs. Pruitt finished speaking. She burst into the entrance hall to find chaos, servants scattering, and furniture overturned, and in the middle of it all, a man with wild eyes and desperate energy, holding Julian against the wall with one hand fisted in the boy's collar. "I know what happens here," the man was saying, his voice ragged. "I've been watching, asking questions in the village. People disappear into these woods and come back changed. Or they don't come back at all." Vivian's vision narrowed. She launched herself at the man, grabbing his arm, trying to break his grip on Julian. "Let him go," the man turned, surprised, and backhanded her almost casually. Vivian hit the floor hard enough to see stars, tasted blood from her split lip. Then Sebastian was there, and everything changed. The temperature in the room dropped. Or perhaps it spiked. Vivian couldn't tell, because suddenly all she could feel was power. Thick, suffocating, absolute. It pressed against her skin like a physical weight. Sebastian grabbed the intruder by the throat and lifted him off his feet with one hand. The man struggled, gasping, but Sebastian held him suspended like he weighed nothing at all. "You're trespassing," Sebastian said, and his voice was wrong, deeper, rougher, layered with something that resonated in Vivian's bones. "Threatening a child under my protection." The man's eyes went wide with terror, and Sebastian's hand began to change. Vivian watched, frozen, as his fingers darkened. Not shadow, but something solid. Fur sprouted along the back of his wrist. His nails lengthened into claws that pressed into the intruder's throat hard enough to draw blood. "Your Grace," Mrs. Pruitt's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Not here. At the children." Sebastian's head turned, and Vivian saw his eyes. They weren't gray anymore. They were gold, bright, inhuman, burning with something ancient and predatory and utterly foreign. He looked at Julian, pressed against the wall and shaking, then at Vivian, bleeding on the floor, then back at the man in his grip. For one terrible moment, Vivian thought he would kill the intruder, thought she would watch those claws tear through flesh, and there would be nothing she could do to stop it. But Sebastian closed his eyes, took one long, shuddering breath. When he opened them again, the gold was fading. "Get him out of my sight," Sebastian said to someone Vivian couldn't see. "Lock him in the old gamekeeper's cottage, under guard. I'll deal with him after I've calmed down." 2 men appeared. Guards Vivian hadn't noticed before. Ayman took the intruder, Sebastian released him, and they dragged him toward a side door. Sebastian looked at his hand. The claws were receding, the fur disappearing, his fingers returning to their normal shape. But the transformation was slow, reluctant. He turned to Vivian, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Human reason fighting something far older and more violent. "Are you hurt?" His voice was still rough. "I'm fine." She wasn't. Her lip was bleeding, her shoulder ached from hitting the floor, and her entire understanding of reality had just shattered. But Julian needed her steady, so steady she would be. Julian. Scared, not injured. Mrs. Pruitt had the boy now, checking him over with brisk efficiency. Sebastian closed his eyes again. Take them upstairs, both of them. Have doctor. And Winters sent for immediately. Your Grace. Now, Mrs. Pruitt. It wasn't a request. Mrs. Pruitt ushered Vivian and Julian toward the stairs. Vivian looked back once and saw Sebastian standing alone in the entrance hall, his hands clenched into fists, his whole body rigid with control. And she understood. He wasn't dangerous because he'd lost control. He was dangerous because holding on to control required everything he had. Dr. Winters declared Julian unharmed and Vivian bruised but functional. He left a salve for her split lip and instructions for rest she had no intention of following. Julian was in his room, finally asleep after an hour of Vivian sitting beside his bed and promising over and over that they were safe, that the man couldn't hurt him, that the Duke wouldn't let anything happen to them. And she wasn't sure she believed it herself anymore. There was a knock on the sitting room door. Vivian opened it to find Lady Beatrice, carrying a tea tray and wearing an expression that suggested she'd come prepared for a difficult conversation. May I come in? Vivian stepped aside. Lady Beatrice set the tea tray on the low table and poured 2 cups with practiced grace. You've had quite the introduction to our household. Your nephew has claws. Yes. And gold eyes. Also yes. Lady Beatrice handed her a teacup. Drink. It will help with the shock. Vivian took the cup but didn't drink. What is he? That's a conversation you should have with Sebastian, not me. Lady Beatrice settled into a chair. But I can tell you this. He is not a danger to you or your brother. What you saw tonight was restraint, not violence. And any other man, any other creature would have killed that intruder without hesitation. He wanted to. Of course he did. Someone threatened a child under his protection. But he didn't. That's the measure of who he is. Lady Beatrice sipped her tea. The question now is whether you can accept what you've learned or whether you'll run. Vivian's hands were shaking. She set the teacup down before she spilled it. I signed a contract. Contracts can be dissolved. Sebastian wouldn't hold you to an agreement made under incomplete information. Lady Beatrice's gaze was uncomfortably perceptive. But I don't think you want to leave. You don't know what I want. Don't I? Lady Beatrice smiled. You want what you've always wanted. Safety for your brother, freedom from running, and a place where your mind is valued instead of wasted. Sebastian is offering you all 3. The question is whether you're brave enough to take them. There was a second knock. This time, it was Sebastian. He looked composed again, completely human, completely controlled. But Vivian could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, like he was afraid one wrong move would shatter something fragile. Lady Beatrice, he said quietly, would you give us a moment? Of course. Lady Beatrice stood, paused to touch Vivian's shoulder briefly, and left. Sebastian closed the door behind her and didn't move closer. I owe you an explanation. Yes, Vivian said. You do. The conversation happened with 10 feet of space between them. Sebastian by the door, Vivian by the fireplace, neither of them willing to cross that distance yet. I'm a wolf shifter, Sebastian said. I can transform into a wolf, fully or partially, depending on need and control. Most of the guards you've seen on the grounds are also shifters, some of the household staff. We live integrated with humans, but separate, hidden. Vivian processed that. How many of you are there? In my territory, nearly 300. In England, thousands. Across the world? We don't have exact numbers. Sebastian's voice was measured, clinical. We're organized into packs. I'm what's called an Alpha King. I rule the Northern Territory and the packs within it. And the man who broke in? A zealot. He's been asking questions in the village, trying to prove that something unnatural happens on my lands. Men like him are rare, but dangerous. They see us as demons, monsters. Are you? Sebastian's eyes met hers. Sometimes. When we need to be. It was honest. Vivian appreciated that more than reassurance would have meant. The medical supplies Grof's information compromised, she said slowly. They're for shifters. Yes, certain medicines and treatments are specific to our physiology. If someone like Gideon Marrow got hold of them, he could use them as proof of what we are, and that would put hundreds of lives at risk. Marrow. Of course Marrow was involved. The man was like a rot that spread through everything. Why tell me this? Vivian asked. Why not just keep me in the dark? Because you saw the truth tonight, and you deserve to know what it means. Sebastian took one careful step forward. Just one. And because there's something else you need to understand, Vivian's pulse jumped. What? When I first saw you at King's Cross Station, and before I knew your name, before I knew anything about you, something in me recognized something in you. He paused, clearly choosing his words with care. We call it a mate bond. It's rare. Not every shifter experiences it. But when it happens, it's immediate. The wolf knows before the man does. Vivian's mouth went dry. You're saying I'm saying my wolf recognized you as mine the moment I scented you on that platform. That everything I've done since has been influenced by that recognition, whether I wanted it to be or not. That's not possible. It is. And it's the reason you felt something on the train when I got close. The bond pulling at you even though you didn't understand what it was. Vivian remembered the heat, the way her body had responded to his proximity, and the sense that she was being drawn toward him by something older than logic. She'd thought it was fear, thought it was just the danger of the situation heightening everything. But if he was telling the truth? I don't believe in fate, she said. Neither did I. Sebastian's smile was bitter. But the bond doesn't care what we believe. It exists whether we accept it or not. So what does that mean? That I'm trapped here? That I have no choice? No. Sebastian's voice turned sharp. You always have a choice. I will never force the bond on you. I will never use it to manipulate or control you. If you want to leave, the contract stands exactly as written. You and Julian will be protected whether you stay or not. Vivian wanted to call him a liar, wanted to find the trap hidden in his words. But she'd watched him stop himself from killing the intruder. Watched him fight for control when every instinct must have been screaming at him to tear the man apart. If he could control that, maybe he could control this. I need time, she said, to think, to understand what this means. Time, Sebastian repeated, that I can give you. He turned to leave, then stopped. The intruder. He asked questions in the village, but he had help getting onto the grounds. Someone told him which entrance to use, which guards would be occupied elsewhere. Vivian's breath caught. Groff. Most likely, which means Marrow knows you're here, and he's already testing my defenses. The words hung between them like a threat. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Then another, a chorus rising from the forest, wild and eerie and strangely beautiful. Sebastian's head tilted, listening. My pack. They're patrolling the boundaries tonight. How many? Vivian asked. Here on the estate? About 40. In the full territory? Nearly 300. 300 wolves. 300 people who could become something other than human. And Sebastian ruled them all. Vivian should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in 6 years, she felt like she might actually be safe. Even if that safety came with claws and gold eyes and a bond she didn't understand. I'm not leaving, she said quietly. Not yet, but I'm not accepting the bond either. Not until I understand what it would mean. Fair enough. Sebastian opened the door, paused. For what it's worth, Miss Caldwell, you're handling this better than most would. I've had practice surviving impossible situations. I know. It's one of the many reasons my wolf chose well. Then he was gone, and Vivian was alone with her thoughts and the distant sound of howling. She went to Julian's room and watched him sleep for a long time. Tomorrow she would have more questions. Tomorrow she would demand answers about the bond and the pack, and what Sebastian truly expected from her. But tonight she would let herself feel safe, even if that safety came with a dangerous price. Vivian woke to gray morning light and the sound of rain against the windows. For a moment, one blessed, quiet moment, she forgot about the betrayal. Forgot that Sebastian had known about her bloodline from the very beginning and said nothing. Then the memory settled back into place like a stone in her chest. She dressed in silence, her movements mechanical. The wolf blood, the treaty, and the fact that she'd been drawn to Sebastian by something she couldn't control and hadn't understood. He'd let her believe her choices were her own, when really she'd been responding to a bond neither of them had asked for. Manipulated. Again. By another man who thought he knew better than to give her the truth. There was a knock on the connecting door. "Julian?" "Come in," she called. He entered cautiously, already dressed, his face worried. "Mrs. Pruitt says there's breakfast downstairs. She says the Duke wants to speak with you." Vivian's jaw tightened. "I'm sure he does." "Viv?" Julian moved closer. "Are you angry with him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he lied. Because he withheld information that changed everything. And because she'd been falling for him while he'd been keeping secrets that made her question whether anything between them was real." But Julian didn't need to hear all that. "Adult matters," she said. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Is he going to make us leave?" The fear in Julian's voice cut through her anger. "No, the contract stands. We're safe here." She touched his shoulder. "That hasn't changed, even if everything else had." Sebastian was already in the breakfast room when she arrived, standing by the window, tension visible in every line of his body. Lady Beatrice sat at the table, teacup in hand, watching them both with sharp eyes. "Miss Caldwell," Sebastian said. His voice was carefully neutral. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." Vivian took a seat as far from him as the table allowed. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Yes. There's been—" "Let me save you the trouble of careful explanations," Vivian interrupted. "I'm still angry. I'm still deciding whether to trust you again. But Julian needs protection, and you're providing it, so I'll continue to fulfill my part of the contract. Is that what you needed to know?" Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. "That's not what I needed to discuss," he said quietly, "though I'm glad to know where we stand." "Then what?" He crossed to the table and set down a telegram. This arrived at the telegraph office at dawn. A messenger brought it to the estate an hour ago. Vivian read it, then read it again, her blood going cold. "Marrow has filed a petition with the magistrate's court," Sebastian said. "He's claiming legal guardianship of Julian on grounds that you obtained custody through fraudulent means and are unfit to care for a minor child." The room tilted. Vivian's fingers clenched around the telegram. "That's absurd. The original documents. He's claiming they were forged after your father's death. He has witnesses prepared to testify that you coerced your father's signature during his final illness." Sebastian's voice was clinical, detached. "He's also submitted evidence that you've moved Julian across county lines repeatedly using false names and forged references. Because I was running from him," which he characterizes as custodial interference and flight from legal authority. Lady Beatrice set down her teacup. "The hearing is scheduled for 4 days from now, in Ashford Cross. 4 days." Vivian's mind raced. And that was barely time to— "Can't you simply refuse to comply?" she asked Sebastian. "You're a duke. Surely your position—" "My position as a duke carries weight, yes, but if I simply ignore a magistrate's order, it raises questions about why I'm so determined to protect you." Sebastian's gaze was steady. "Questions that could lead to scrutiny I cannot afford, not with the pack's safety at stake." Vivian understood. If he defied the magistrate too openly, people would ask why, would investigate, would potentially discover what he was. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We fight him legally," Lady Beatrice said, "with evidence that exposes his corruption so thoroughly that no magistrate would dare uphold his petition." "What kind of evidence?" "A ledger." Sebastian moved to the window again, his back to her. "Marrow keeps detailed records of every bribe he's paid, every official he's purchased, every illegal transaction he's conducted over the past decade. With that ledger, we could dismantle his entire network and ensure he never threatens you or Julian again." "Where is it?" "That's the problem. We don't know precisely. He moves it frequently to avoid exactly this kind of seizure." Sebastian turned. "But we've been gathering intelligence, watching patterns." "Show me," Vivian said. Sebastian hesitated. "Vivian, I said show me. Whatever tension exists between us personally doesn't change the fact that Julian's safety is at stake." She stood. "And I'm good at finding patterns. You said so yourself." Lady Beatrice's mouth curved slightly. She has you there, nephew. Sebastian gestured toward his study. In this way. They spent 2 hours reviewing intelligence reports, witness statements, surveillance notes. Vivienne read everything twice, ignoring Sebastian's presence across the desk, focusing solely on the information. And then she found it. He moves the ledger every week, she said slowly. But he always moves it on a Thursday, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he always uses the same courier service, Bellamy and Sons, out of London. Sebastian looked over her shoulder, careful not to touch her, she noticed. How did you determine that? 3 separate witnesses mentioned seeing a Bellamy courier at his offices on Thursday afternoons. And there's a notation in this surveillance report. Subject received delivery, refused to sign receipt. I sent courier away with sealed package. Vivienne traced the pattern with her finger. People don't refuse to sign receipts unless they're moving something they don't want documented. If he moves it every Thursday, Lady Beatrice began. Then today is Tuesday, Vivienne finished. Tomorrow is Wednesday. The ledger is currently wherever he's keeping it, and it won't be moved until Thursday afternoon. We have a window. Sebastian's expression shifted. Surprise and something else. Respect, maybe. The counting house. He owns a private counting house in Ashford Cross. Uses it for legitimate business, but it has a strong room with enhanced security. If the ledger is anywhere between moves, it's there. Vivienne stood. We need to retrieve it before Thursday. I'll send a team tonight. No. Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp. He'll be watching for exactly that. He knows you're protecting Miss Caldwell. Knows you have resources. He'll have the strong room guarded against any obvious attempt. Then what do you suggest? Vivienne and Lady Beatrice looked at each other. Some unspoken understanding passed between them. I suggest, Lady Beatrice said carefully, that we consider a less obvious approach. The argument lasted another hour. Sebastian insisted he could get the ledger without risking Vivienne. Lady Beatrice countered that any attempt by his people would be anticipated and countered. Vivienne stayed silent, thinking. Finally, she spoke. I can get it. Sebastian's response was immediate. Absolutely not. Why not? I'm just a woman he's trying to reclaim, not a threat. I can get close in ways your people can't. Vivienne kept her voice level. But I've been doing this for 6 years, slipping past people who underestimate me, getting into places I'm not supposed to be. This is what I'm good at. It's too dangerous. Everything is dangerous, but this is Julian's safety we're discussing. She met his eyes directly. You said you valued my skills. You said that being underestimated ends here, so let me use what I'm good at. Miss Caldwell, Lady Beatrice is right. Any move you make will be anticipated. But me? Vivienne's smile was cold. I'm just a desperate woman. Predictable. No threat at all. Sebastian looked like he wanted to lock her in her room. Postguards. Do anything except let her walk into danger. But he'd promised her agency. And that promise had to mean something. If you do this, he said quietly, you don't go entirely alone. I'll have people positioned nearby, watching. If anything goes wrong, I'll signal, Vivienne agreed, but they stay back unless I call for them. Sebastian's hands clenched, unclenched, and you take this. He withdrew something from his desk drawer, a small silver whistle on a fine chain. One sharp blast. My pack will hear it within a mile and respond immediately. Vivienne took the whistle. It was warm from being near him. Thank you. Don't thank me. His voice was rough. Just come back safely. The rest of that day passed in careful planning. Lady Beatrice helped Vivienne map the counting house layout, based on intelligence they'd gathered. Sebastian arranged for watchers to be positioned at key points around the merchant district. Neither of them spoke about the Wolfblood revelation or the betrayal that still sat between them like a wall. And there wasn't time for that conversation yet. By evening, Vivienne was as prepared as she could be. She checked on Julian, found him in his room, reading, trying to pretend everything was normal. Viv? He looked up when she entered. The hearing, in 4 days? Will they really try to take me back? She sat beside him on the bed. They'll try, but we're not going to let that happen. How? By being smarter than they are. She smoothed his hair back. You know how we've always stayed ahead? By being clever, by watching for patterns, by not giving up? Yes. That doesn't stop just because we're not running anymore. We're still going to be clever, still going to find the way through. She squeezed his hand. Trust me. I do. Julian's voice was small. But I'm scared. I know, so am I. Honesty felt important. But being scared doesn't mean we're going to lose. It just means we understand what's at stake. After Julian finally fell asleep, Vivian found herself in the library. Lady Beatrice was there, reading by lamplight. Can't sleep either? The older woman asked. Too much to think about. The hearing, the ledger, Sebastian's deception. Lady Beatrice set down her book. That last one is eating at you. Vivian didn't deny it. He said he was trying to protect my agency, but how is withholding information protecting my choice? I was making decisions based on incomplete understanding. True, Lady Beatrice's gaze was steady. But would you have stayed if he'd told you everything on that train? That you were wolf-blooded? That the bond was pulling you toward him? Said that your mother's bloodline made you a treaty asset? I don't know. Exactly, you don't know. And neither did he. So he gave you time to see that you were valued here for yourself, for your mind, your courage, your skills, before telling you about factors you couldn't control. Lady Beatrice paused. It was a judgment call, perhaps not the right one, but it came from a desire to give you real choice, not manipulate you into staying. Or so he says. He's many things, my nephew. Controlling, yes. Possessive, certainly. But he is not a liar. Lady Beatrice's voice was firm. If he'd wanted to manipulate you, the bond would have made that easy. He could have pushed you toward it, used proximity and touch to strengthen the pull. He didn't. He gave you space and time and real contracts with exit clauses. Vivian knew that was true, but it didn't erase the hurt of the deception. I need to focus on Julian right now, she said finally. Everything else can wait until he's safe. Fair enough, Lady Beatrice stood. Get some rest, Miss Caldwell. Tomorrow will require all your wits. Wednesday arrived gray and damp. Vivian dressed in her plainest gown, pulled her hair into a simple knot, and prepared to become invisible. Sebastian met her in the entrance hall. His eyes were shadowed. He clearly hadn't slept either. My people are already in position, he said quietly. Rowan, my head enforcer, is watching the main entrance. 2 others are covering the service alley and the north side. They won't interfere unless you signal. Good. Vivian? He stopped her with a hand on her arm. Brief contact, immediately withdrawn. If anything feels wrong, if you sense a trap, get out. The ledger isn't worth your life. Julian's safety is worth everything. Not everything, not you. The words were fierce, quiet. Promise me you'll be careful. She wanted to stay angry with him, wanted to maintain the cold distance, but his fear for her was genuine, and despite everything, that mattered. I promise, she said. Then she left before she could change her mind. The counting house sat in the merchant district of Ashford Cross, a square, solid building with barred windows and a single reinforced front entrance. Vivian watched it from across the street for 30 minutes, counting guards, timing their movements, looking for patterns. 2 guards outside, rotation every hour, a clerk coming and going through the front entrance. But there was also a service entrance in the side alley, used for deliveries, coal, our maintenance, less visible, less guarded. Vivian waited until a coal wagon made a delivery, then slipped into the alley while the service door was propped open. She moved quickly past the coal man, through a storage room, and into the main building. The layout matched what Lady Beatrice had described. Offices on the ground floor, strong room in the back. But getting to the strong room meant passing through the main office area, and there were people there, clerks working, guards standing watch. Vivian needed a distraction. She found it in the storage room. A stack of ledgers balanced precariously on a shelf. One careful nudge and they toppled, hitting the floor with a crash that brought 2 guards running. While they investigated, Vivian slipped past and down the corridor toward the strong room. At the door was heavy iron with a mechanical lock, complex, but not impossible. Vivian pulled out the lockpick she'd borrowed from Lady Beatrice's surprisingly well-equipped collection and went to work. It took 3 minutes, 3 minutes of her heart hammering, her hands shaking, every sound making her flinch. But the lock clicked open. She pulled the door wide and stepped inside. and found the strong room completely empty except for one thing. A leather-bound ledger sitting on a center table, alone, unguarded, like it was waiting for her. Every instinct screamed trap. Vivian reached for the whistle around her neck, and Captain Silas Rook stepped out from behind the door she'd just opened. "Hello, Miss Caldwell." His voice was polite, cold. "Mr. And Marrow thought you might try something predictable." Vivian's hand closed around the whistle, but Rook was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisted, and the whistle fell from her grip. Now, none of that." He pushed her toward the table. "You're going to pick up that ledger, and then you and I are going to wait for the magistrate's men to arrive and arrest you for theft and trespass. You set a trap. Obviously. Marrow knew your Duke would eventually try for the ledger, knew he'd send someone expendable rather than risk himself." Rook's smile was thin. "Though I admit I didn't expect him to send you personally. That's either remarkable confidence or remarkable stupidity on his part." Vivian's mind raced. The whistle was on the floor, too far to reach. The door was blocked. Rook was armed. She could see the knife at his belt. But he'd made a mistake. He'd assumed she was alone. "Sebastian didn't send me," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I came on my own, against his orders, actually." "How very brave." Rook didn't believe her. "And he has people watching. They saw me enter. If I don't come out, then they'll do what? Storm a legitimate business and assault a law-abiding citizen? I think not." Rook gestured to the ledger. "Pick it up." Vivian picked it up, felt the weight of it. All of Marrow's corruption, documented and bound in leather. "Good. Now we wait." "For what?" "For the men I've already summoned. They'll be here shortly with the magistrate's warrant for your arrest. And once you're in custody, charged with theft, your precious Duke won't be able to protect you without revealing exactly why he's so invested in keeping you safe." Rook's expression was satisfied. "Marrow is quite pleased with this plan." Vivian's hands tightened on the ledger. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her breath coming short. And then she heard it. A wolf's howl. Close. Too close to be natural. Rook's expression changed. The strong room door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. Torn off its hinges by something impossibly strong. Sebastian stood in the doorway, and his eyes were pure, molten gold. "You," he said. His voice layered with something that made Vivian's bones vibrate, made a critical error in judgment. Two other men flanked him, both with the same unnatural stillness, the same predatory grace. Pack members. Rowan and another she didn't recognize. Rook went for his knife. He didn't get it clear of its sheath before Sebastian moved, faster than anything human, crossing the space between them and grabbing Rook by the throat. Not with claws this time, but with the terrifying strength of an alpha who'd decided someone needed to learn about consequences. "You threatened someone under my protection," Sebastian said pleasantly. "You set a trap for her. You planned to have her arrested and used as leverage." Rook's face was turning red. Marrow will do nothing, because Miss Caldwell is leaving here with that ledger, and tomorrow morning it will be delivered to the magistrate, along with a full accounting of every corrupt transaction your employer has conducted." Sebastian's smile was all teeth. "And when that happens, Marrow's petition will be dismissed, along with his freedom and his fortune." He released Rook, who collapsed, gasping. "You have a choice," Sebastian continued. "You can leave Ashford Cross tonight, disappear, never come within 100 miles of Miss Caldwell or her brother again, or—" He let the alternative hang in the air. "Or what?" Rook managed to rasp. Sebastian's hand shifted, just slightly, just enough for claws to press through where his fingernails had been. "Or we test whether you can outrun a pack of very angry wolves, in the dark, through unfamiliar forest." The gold in Sebastian's eyes burned brighter. "Your choice, but choose quickly. My patience is exhausted." Rook chose. He scrambled to his feet and ran. Sebastian let him go. Outside, in the alley behind the counting house, Vivian leaned against the wall and tried to stop shaking. The ledger was clutched to her chest. Sebastian stood a few feet away, giving her space, his eyes slowly fading back to gray. Rowan and the other pack member had melted into the shadows, present but not visible. "You came," Vivian said finally. "Of course I came. You were in danger. Sebastian's voice was rough. Did you think I wouldn't? You said you'd have people watching. You didn't say you'd be one of them. I couldn't stay away. The thought of you in there, alone, possibly hurt. He stopped, took a breath. I tried to trust the plan. Trust that you knew what you were doing. But when I heard you were trapped inside with Rook, the bond. Another breath. I'm sorry, I should have trusted you to handle it. He had a knife. And a trap. Vivienne's hands were still shaking. I'm not sure I could have handled it alone. You would have found a way. You always do. The confidence in his voice steadied her somehow. The intruder, she said suddenly. From the other night. The one who attacked Julian. What happened to him? Sebastian's expression darkened. We questioned him. He was hired, paid to cause a disturbance and gather information about the household's defenses. He gave us a name before we released him far outside our territory with instructions never to return. Who hired him? A man matching Rook's description. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Marrow has been testing our defenses for weeks. Peter Groff wasn't the only leak, just the most obvious one. And when Groff became a liability, you found him dead. Made to look like suicide? Vivienne's stomach twisted. I identified Groff as the leak. My information likely got him killed. No. Sebastian's voice was firm. Marrow's paranoia and ruthlessness got him killed. You simply did what I asked you to do. Find the truth. What Marrow chose to do with that truth is his responsibility, not yours. But Vivienne still felt the weight of it. A man was dead, and she'd provided the intelligence that marked him. There's something else you should know, Sebastian continued. The medical supplies we were concerned about. The shipment Groff compromised information about, we rerouted it, changed the delivery time and location. It arrived safely yesterday while Marrow's people were watching the wrong road. One less problem, small mercies. We should go, Vivienne said. Bart, get the ledger somewhere safe. Agreed. Sebastian offered his hand. Vivienne hesitated. Things were still complicated between them, still unresolved. But she was cold and shaken, and the ledger was heavy. She took his hand. The warmth was immediate, the bond pulling at her like it always did. But this time, she didn't pull away. They walked to the carriage in silence, his hand steady around hers. Back at the estate, Lady Beatrice took possession of the ledger with brisk efficiency. I'll have our solicitor review this tonight and prepare the documentation for the magistrate. By morning, we'll be ready. And if Marrow tries something before then, Vivienne asked, then he'll discover that attempting to breach Wycliffe Estate is considerably more dangerous than setting traps in counting houses. Lady Beatrice's smile was sharp. You've done well, Miss Caldwell. Get some rest. Tomorrow we finish this. Vivienne checked on Julian, found him asleep, safe, unaware of how close things had come to disaster, then returned to her room. She was exhausted, shaking with reaction, and despite everything she felt lighter. They had the ledger, they had evidence. Julian would be safe. There was a soft knock on her door. Sebastian stood in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. May I come in? He asked quietly. Just for a moment. There's something I need to say. Vivienne stepped aside. He entered but didn't sit. Stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, like he was physically restraining himself. I owe you an apology, he said. Not for the bond, neither of us controls that, but for not telling you about your bloodline sooner. And you were right. You deserved the truth from the beginning, not when I decided you were ready to hear it. Vivienne's throat was tight. Why did you wait? Because I was afraid. The admission seemed to cost him. Afraid that if you knew about the bond, the bloodline, the treaty, all of it, you'd see yourself as trapped. As a prize to be claimed rather than a person to be valued. And I needed you to understand that you mattered here for yourself first, for your mind, your courage, your choices. But I was making choices based on incomplete information. I know, and that was wrong of me. Sebastian finally met her eyes. I thought I was protecting your agency by giving you time to see your own value before adding complications you couldn't control. But really, I was just protecting myself. Because if you'd known everything and still chosen to leave, I would have had to accept that the bond wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. The raw honesty of it stole her breath. "I'm still angry," she said softly. "And I'm still frightened of what the bond means. What it takes from my choices. I know. But I understand why you waited. And I believe you were trying to give me real choice, even if you went about it the wrong way." Something eased in Sebastian's expression. Not quite relief, but close. "I also believe," Vivienne continued slowly, "that you proved something today. You let me go into danger even though every instinct must have screamed at you to stop me. You trusted my judgment. And when I needed help, you came, but you didn't take over. You didn't treat me like something fragile that needed to be locked away for safety. You're the least fragile person I've ever met. Then treat me that way. No more secrets. No more withholding information for my own good." She moved closer. "If we're going to make any of this work, the contract, the partnership, whatever this is between us, it has to be built on honesty. Complete honesty." "Agreed." Sebastian's voice was rough. "No more secrets. And I need time to understand what I am now, what the wolf blood means, what the bond means." She took a breath. "I'm not ready to commit to anything permanent. Not yet. I understand. But I'm not running either." The words felt important, true. "I'm choosing to stay, to see where this goes. And to let myself feel what I'm feeling without constantly questioning whether it's real or just the bond." Sebastian's hand lifted, hesitated, then touched her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "What are you feeling?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also safe. For the first time in 6 years, I feel safe and seen and valued." "You are all of those things." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You're also brilliant and brave and entirely too willing to walk into danger." Says the man who just threatened someone with being hunted through a forest. His smile was soft, real. "Fair point." They stood there, close but not quite touching, the fire crackling behind them. Vivienne could feel the bond pulling at her, wanting more, wanting closer. But she was learning to recognize it as separate from her own desires. And her own desires were complicated. "I should let you rest," Sebastian said finally. "Tomorrow will be demanding." "Yes," but neither of them moved. "Sebastian?" "Yes?" "Thank you for coming when I needed you, for trusting me enough to let me try." She hesitated. "For giving me real choice, even when it terrifies you." "Always," he said quietly. "Whatever you choose, whatever you decide about the bond or us or any of this, I'll respect it. That's my promise to you." He stepped back, putting distance between them, and moved toward the door. "Sebastian," she said again. He turned. Vivienne crossed the space between them and kissed him. Not desperate or heated or lost to the bond. Just a choice. Her choice. A kiss that said, "I'm choosing this. Choosing you, right now, in this moment." His hand came up to cradle her face, and for a long moment, the world narrowed to warmth and connection and the sense of something clicking into place. When they pulled apart, both breathing harder, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "Bond or no bond. Wolf blood or no wolf blood. I'm falling in love with the woman who negotiates exit clauses and spots patterns in intelligence reports and walks into counting houses to save her brother." "I know this is fast," Vivienne whispered. "We barely know each other. It's only been a few days." "I know. And I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or the bond or some combination. I know that too. But I think," she took a breath, "I think I'm falling too. And it terrifies me, but I'm choosing it anyway, choosing to see where it goes." Sebastian's smile was devastating. "That's all I could ever ask." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, like they had all the time in the world instead of a magistrate's hearing in 3 days and an enemy determined to destroy them. When he finally left, Vivienne stood by the fire for a long time, her fingers pressed to her lips, her heart racing. Tomorrow they would deliver the ledger. Tomorrow they would fight Morrow in court. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and new challenges. But tonight, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own, and that felt like victory. Thursday morning dawned cold and clear. Vivienne dressed carefully in the deep blue gown Lady Beatrice had lent her, something respectable enough for a magistrate's office. elegant enough to suggest she was under the protection of someone significant. Armor in its own way. Julian sat in the breakfast room, pushing eggs around his plate, his face pale. Do I have to go? No. Vivienne squeezed his shoulder. You stay here with Mrs. Pruitt and Lady Beatrice. I'll handle this. But it's about me, which is exactly why you don't need to be there. She knelt beside his chair. Let me fight this battle. You've been brave enough for 6 years. Let me be brave for you today. His arms wrapped around her neck, tight and trembling. What if they don't believe you? They will, because we have proof. She pulled back to look at him. Mr. Marrow built his power on secrets and corruption. Today we're bringing all of it into the light. And light is very hard to argue with. Sebastian entered, already dressed for travel. His eyes found hers immediately. The carriage is ready, mister. Locksley is meeting us at the magistrate's office with the ledger documentation. Good. Vivienne stood, smoothed her skirts. Let's finish this. The ride to Ashford Cross took an hour. Sebastian sat across from her, silent, tension radiating from every line of his body. Finally, he spoke. Whatever happens today, whatever the magistrate decides, I want you to know that I will not let Marrow take Julian. If the legal approach fails, we have other options. What kind of options? The kind that involve Julian disappearing to a very secure location where no magistrate's order can reach him. Sebastian's voice was calm, absolute. I would prefer to win this through legitimate channels, but I will not sacrifice your brother to propriety. It should have frightened her, this casual discussion of defying court orders. Instead, and it steadied her, Sebastian had resources, power, determination, and he was willing to use all of it to protect Julian. It won't come to that, she said. The ledger will be enough. I hope you're right. The carriage rolled through Ashford Cross and stopped outside the magistrate's office, a stolid brick building that represented law and order and everything Marrow had spent a decade corrupting. Mr. Locksley was waiting on the steps, document case in hand, looking nervous but determined. Your Grace, Miss Caldwell, everything is prepared. The ledger has been authenticated, and I've prepared a full brief documenting the evidence of corruption. And the magistrate? Sebastian asked. Sir Frederick Thorn. He's known for being rigorous and difficult to bribe. So which is likely why Marrow tried to bypass him with the initial petition. Locksley's expression was grim. But Marrow has filed a counter-motion. He claims the ledger was obtained through illegal means and should be inadmissible. Of course he has. Vivienne's hands clenched. What are our chances? Better than even if Sir Frederick is as incorruptible as his reputation suggests. Locksley gestured toward the entrance. Shall we? They entered together, Sebastian, Vivienne, and Locksley, and were shown to a formal hearing room. Sir Frederick Thorn sat behind an imposing desk, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and the air of someone who'd seen every trick and wasn't impressed by any of them. And across the room, looking perfectly composed and utterly confident, sat Gideon Marrow. He was smaller than Vivienne had expected, unremarkable, even. Brown hair going gray, average build, expensive but conservative clothing. Nothing about him suggested the monster who'd haunted her for 6 years, except his eyes, cold, calculating, and fixed on her with the certainty of a man who believed he'd already won. Your Grace, Marrow said pleasantly. Miss Caldwell, how kind of you to join us. Mr. Marrow, Sebastian's voice was ice. I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. Sir Frederick's gavel came down. Gentlemen, Miss Caldwell, let us proceed with civility. He reviewed the papers before him. This hearing concerns the petition filed by Mr. Gideon Marrow seeking guardianship of the minor child Julian Caldwell, currently in the care of his sister, Miss Vivienne Caldwell. Mr. Marrow, your position. Marrow stood, all false courtesy. Sir Frederick, I come before you seeking only to protect a child who has been subjected to 6 years of instability and questionable care. Miss Caldwell has moved the boy across county lines repeatedly, using false names and forged documents. She has evaded legal authorities and denied the child proper education and medical attention. That's a lie, Vivienne said sharply. The gavel came down again. Miss Caldwell, you will have opportunity to respond. Mr. Marrow, continue. I hold the original debt documentation from her late father, which includes provision for guardianship should Miss Caldwell prove unable to provide adequate care. I have witnesses prepared to testify that she obtained custody through fraudulent means during her father's final illness. Marrow's smile was thin. I seek only to fulfill my legal obligation and provide the boy with the stable home he deserves. Sir Frederick turned to Sebastian. Your Grace, you are here representing Miss Caldwell's interests. I am providing legal support, yes. Mr. Locksley will present our response. Locksley stood, opened his document case, and withdrew the ledger. Sir Frederick, we oppose Mr. Marrow's petition on grounds that it is part of a larger pattern of corruption, fraud, and illegal activity. This ledger, recovered from Mr. Marrow's private counting house, documents a decade of bribery, forgery, and manipulation of legal proceedings. Marrow's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. That ledger was obtained through theft and trespass. Miss Caldwell herself broke into my property to steal it. And the evidence is inadmissible, and she should be arrested for. The ledger was obtained during a legitimate investigation into threats against a member of my household, Sebastian interrupted. Miss Caldwell was acting under my authority and protection, and the contents of this ledger are far more damning than the circumstances of its recovery. Sir Frederick held up a hand. Let me see it. Locksley approached and handed over the ledger. For 10 long minutes, the only sound in the room was the pages turning. Sir Frederick's expression grew progressively darker as he read. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Marrow, this ledger contains notations that appear to document payments to magistrates, clerks, and other officials, including, he paused, his voice turning cold, 2 payments to Magistrate Collins, who signed the initial warrant for Miss Caldwell's investigation. Forgery, Marrow said smoothly. Obviously manufactured to discredit me. I've never seen that ledger before in my life. The handwriting matches documents you filed with this office, Locksley said. We have a graphologist prepared to testify. And I have witnesses who will swear Miss Caldwell has been making threats against me for months, that she's unstable, vindictive, and willing to manufacture evidence. Marrow's voice was calm, reasonable. She's been on the run for 6 years, using forged papers, living under false names. Why would anyone believe her word over mine? Because, Vivian said quietly, everything in that ledger can be verified. Every bribe, every payment, every corrupt transaction. You documented it all because you thought you were untouchable. You thought no one would ever dare challenge you. Marrow's smile was poisonous. You're a desperate woman with a history of deception. No one will. The door to the hearing room burst open. A clerk stumbled in, breathless. Sir Frederick, I apologize for the interruption, but there are 6 magistrates from the Regional Assize Court outside. They're demanding to be admitted immediately. Sir Frederick's eyebrows rose. On what grounds? They say they've received evidence of widespread corruption in this district and are here to begin formal investigations. Marrow went very still. Sebastian's smile was sharp and satisfied. I may have sent copies of the ledger to several interested parties last night, including the Regional Assize Court and the Home Office and 3 separate newspapers. You had no right, Marrow started. I had every right to report criminal activity. Sebastian's voice was pleasant, deadly. You made a mistake, Marrow. You threatened someone under my protection. You tried to use the law as a weapon, so I'm using it right back. The 6 magistrates entered, senior men with the weight of authority and visible anger. The lead magistrate, a gray-haired man with a colonel's bearing, addressed Sir Frederick directly. We've reviewed the evidence submitted by Duke Wycliffe. The ledger documents systematic corruption across 4 counties, including bribes paid to 7 sitting magistrates. His voice was granite. We're here to take Mr. Marrow into custody and begin a full investigation. Marrow stood, his composure finally cracking. This is absurd. You can't possibly. We can, and we will. The lead magistrate gestured to the constables who'd entered behind them. Mr. Gideon Marrow, you are under arrest for corruption, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. This is persecution. The Duke is using his position to. The Duke provided evidence. We verified it. The law will take its course. The constables moved to either side of Marrow. You'll have opportunity to defend yourself in a proper trial. Until then, you're remanded to custody. Vivian watched as they led Marrow away. 6 years of running. 6 years of fear. And it ended with him being escorted out in chains, still protesting, still believing he could talk his way free. Sir Frederick cleared his throat. Well, given the circumstances, I believe Mr. Marrow's petition for guardianship is thoroughly moot. Per Miss Caldwell, the boy remains in your care. Case dismissed. It was over, just like that. Over. Outside, in the cold morning air, Vivian stood on the steps and tried to remember how to breathe. Miss Caldwell, Locksley's voice, concerned. Are you quite all right? Yes, She pressed a hand to her chest. It's over. It's actually over. It is. Sebastian stood beside her, not touching but present. Marrow will stand trial. His network will be dismantled. You and Julian are free. Free. The word felt foreign. Impossible. Your Grace, Locksley said carefully. There is one matter we should discuss. The Wolfblood Treaty provision is hereby dissolved, Sebastian said firmly. Miss Caldwell is not bound by treaty obligations. She never was, as far as I'm concerned. The protection I offered was personal, and not political. Vivienne turned to stare at him. What? The treaty your mother's family signed centuries ago. It granted the pack certain land rights in exchange for bloodline protection. But those land rights... Sebastian's expression was carefully neutral. They're valuable, extremely valuable. They include mineral rights, water rights, and access to territories I've been leveraging for pack security and income. How valuable? Vivian asked. Valuable enough that giving them up will require the pack to relocate several operations and forfeit roughly £30,000 annually. Sebastian met her eyes. But the treaty only holds if the bloodline member accepts pack protection voluntarily. If you choose to leave, to live independently, the treaty dissolves and those rights revert to your family line. As to you, you're saying you'd give up £30,000 a year to ensure you're here by choice, not obligation. Yes. His voice was steady. I want you to stay, Vivian. I want you to choose this life, choose partnership with me, choose the pack. But I will not keep you through legal manipulation or treaty obligations. Your freedom matters more than pack resources. Vivian's throat was tight. This was his sacrifice. Not symbolic, not token. Real sacrifice. Real loss. Chosen deliberately to prove she had agency. What would happen to the pack if you gave up those resources, she asked. We'd adapt, find new arrangements. It would be difficult but not catastrophic. Sebastian's gaze was unwavering. But it's your choice, not mine, not the pack's. Yours. Locksley was watching them both with sharp interest. I can prepare dissolution papers if you wish, Miss Caldwell. Or treaty renewal papers if you choose to accept the protection formally. Vivian looked at Sebastian. Really looked. He'd just destroyed Marrow's empire, freed her from 6 years of pursuit, and offered to bankrupt his pack's annual income to give her a choice. I need time, she said, to understand what this all means, what I want my life to look like now that I'm not running. Of course. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but she saw the flash of fear in his eyes, fear that she'd choose to leave. But she continued, I'd like that time to happen here, at Wycliffe, with you. The relief in his face was worth everything. They returned to the estate by early afternoon. Julian was waiting in the entrance hall, Mrs. Pruitt and Lady Beatrice flanking him like guards. Well, Julian's voice was small, frightened. Vivienne crossed to him and pulled him into her arms. It's over. Marrow was arrested. The magistrate dismissed his petition. You're safe. We're both safe. Julian went rigid in her arms. Then he started shaking. Then he started crying, great, gulping sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. 6 years of fear pouring out all at once. It's all right, Vivienne whispered, holding him tight. You're safe. I promise. You're safe. Julian cried until he had no more tears, then laughed, high and slightly hysterical, then cried again. Vivienne held him through all of it, her own eyes burning but refusing to let the tears fall. Not yet. Not when Julian needed her steady. Mrs. Pruitt produced a handkerchief and a glass of water. And Lady Beatrice murmured something about preparing a celebratory dinner. Sebastian stood back, giving them space, but his eyes never left Vivienne. Finally, Julian pulled away, scrubbing at his face with the handkerchief. Sorry, don't apologize. You've earned those tears. Vivian smoothed his hair back. We both have. What happens now? Julian asked. Now? Vivian smiled. Now we figure out what normal life looks like. School, friends, a home that doesn't change every 3 months. All the things we couldn't have before. Here, at the estate, if that's what you want, or somewhere else. We have choices now, Julian. Real choices. She squeezed his shoulder. We'll figure it out together. That evening, there was a celebration. Nothing formal. Lady Beatrice insisted on calling it a quiet family dinner. But the dining room was full. Mrs. Pruitt had outdone herself with the meal. Julian was laughing for the first time in Vivian's memory. Even the normally stern Rowan cracked a smile when Vivian thanked him for his help. After dinner, Sebastian found her in the library. Walk with me? He asked. They walked the estate grounds as twilight settled over the moors. The forest pressed close, and Vivian could hear sounds in the darkness, movement, low calls, the presence of the pack. They're celebrating too, Sebastian said. Marrow's defeat means security for the pack. No more threat of exposure through his corruption. I'm glad. Vivian pulled her shawl closer against the cold. Sebastian, about the treaty. You don't need to decide now. I know, but I want you to understand something. She stopped walking, turned to face him. 6 years ago, I ran because I had no choice. Because staying meant losing everything. And I've been running ever since, always one step ahead, always looking over my shoulder. And now I want to stop running. I want to build something, have a purpose beyond survival. She took a breath. You asked me once what I wanted. I didn't have an answer then, but I do now. What do you want? I want to help people who are trapped the way I was. People caught in corrupt systems, being hunted by men like Marrow, with nowhere to turn. Vivian's words came faster now, the idea forming as she spoke. You have resources, connections, legal power. I have experience, pattern recognition, the ability to see how these predators operate. Together, we could build something that actually protects people instead of just punishing corruption after it's already destroyed lives. Sebastian was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You want to create what? An organization? A network? Resources for people who need to disappear? Legal support for those fighting corrupt guardianship claims? Intelligence gathering on debt lords and traffickers? She was warming to the idea now. We could use the pack's resources, but it wouldn't be pack business. It would be separate. Something that helps humans and shifters alike. That's ambitious. Is it impossible? No. Sebastian's smile was slow, genuine. It's brilliant. And it would give you a role here that's entirely your own. Not defined by the bond, not dependent on me, not limited by what anyone else thinks you should be. Exactly. Vivian felt lighter than she had in years. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand the bond or the wolf blood or any of it. But this purpose, I understand. And I choose it. And us? Sebastian asked quietly. What do you choose about us? Vivian moved closer until she could see the gold flickering in his eyes, even in the dimming light. I choose to try, to see where this goes, to build something together as partners, not as alpha and bondmate, but as two people who respect each other's strengths and trust each other's choices. That sounds like the beginning of a partnership. It is. She reached up, touched his face. A real one, built on honesty and choice. He kissed her then, not desperate like in the rain, but steady, sure, act like a promise being made. His arms wrapped around her and she felt safe and seen and chosen. When they pulled apart, Sebastian's expression was serious. There's one more thing you should know about the bond. What? It can be intensified, completed, through a formal mating bond, a shifter ritual that would tie us together permanently. He held up a hand before she could speak. I'm not asking for that. Not now. Maybe not for years. But you should know it exists. Know what the eventual choice would entail. What would it entail? A ceremony, a claiming. And after that, we'd be bound not just by attraction or choice, but by something deeper. You'd be able to sense me, feel when I'm in danger, share some aspects of pack awareness, and I'd be bound to you the same way. It sounded overwhelming, terrifying, permanent. I'm not ready for that, Vivian said honestly. I know, and that's fine. I'm simply telling you so, there are no more surprises. Sebastian's hand cupped her cheek. Whatever you choose, whenever you choose it, I'll respect it. That's my vow to you. And mine to you, Vivian said, is that I'll stay honest. I'll tell you when I'm scared, when I need space, when the bond feels like too much. I won't run without talking to you first. That's all I ask. They stood there in the twilight, the forest alive around them, the future uncertain but full of possibility. And for the first time in 6 years, Vivian wasn't afraid of what came next. A week later, Vivian sat in Sebastian's study, their study now, since he'd insisted she take half the desk space for her new project. Reviewing letters from 3 families who'd reached out requesting help, Sebastian had provided initial funding for what they were calling the Caldwell Network, enough to hire a clerk, rent a small office in town for confidential meetings, and establish connections with trustworthy solicitors across several counties. The PAC's resources supplemented what was needed for safe houses and emergency relocations. Julian knocked and entered, looking more like a normal 12-year-old boy every day. The cough was gone, the fear was fading. He'd gained weight and started lessons with a tutor who claimed he was remarkably clever. Viv? Lady Beatrice says there's someone here to see you. A woman from Manchester. She says her husband's employer is trying to force her into signing away her children's inheritance. Vivian looked up. I tell Lady Beatrice I'll be there in 5 minutes, and ask Mrs. Pruitt to prepare tea, something strong. The woman will probably need it. Julian nodded and left. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, watching her with quiet approval. Another case? Potentially. I'll need to review the documents, verify the story. Vivian stood, smoothed her skirts. This is what you signed up for, you know. A study full of desperate people and complicated legal battles. I know. His smile was warm. I wouldn't have it any other way. She crossed to him, stood on her toes, and kissed him briefly. Thank you, for this, for all of it. Thank you for choosing to stay. As Vivian headed downstairs to meet the woman from Manchester, the first of many who would come seeking help, seeking justice, seeking a way out of impossible situations, she felt the bond pull at her, warm and steady. She didn't fight it anymore. She'd learned that choosing to stay and accepting the bond weren't the same thing. The first was freedom. The second would come in time, if and when she was ready. For now, she had work to do. People to help, a life to build. And a partnership with a werewolf duke who'd given up treaty rights and £30,000 just to prove she had a choice. That was more than enough. That night, as they prepared for bed, Vivian mentioned something she'd been thinking about. What happened to Captain Rook after you threatened him at the counting house? Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He took my advice, fled to the continent the same night. We received word 3 days later that he'd boarded a ship to France. He hasn't been seen in England since. Good. Vivian felt a weight lift. One less threat to worry about. Marrow's entire network is collapsing without him, Sebastian added. The men who worked for him are scattering. Some are being arrested as the investigations continue. Others are simply disappearing, trying to escape before the law catches up with them. Justice, Vivian said quietly. Slow, but thorough. The best kind, she settled against him. His arm around her shoulders, the fire crackling in the hearth. Safe, warm, home. For the first time in 6 years, Vivian Caldwell could close her eyes without wondering where she'd need to run tomorrow. And that was the greatest victory of all. 6 months later, the parlor at Wycliffe Estate had been transformed. And what was once a formal receiving room now held a working office. Desks, filing cabinets, maps of England marked with safe routes and trusted contacts. The Caldwell Network, as it had come to be known, operated from this room, helping people escape corrupt guardianship, evade debt lords, find legal recourse against impossible situations. Vivian reviewed the latest correspondence while rain drummed against the windows. 23 active cases, 47 families successfully relocated, 6 corrupt officials exposed and removed from office. Not a bad 6 months. Julian entered, now 13 and gangly with growth, carrying a tea tray. Mrs. Pruitt says you haven't eaten since breakfast. I had toast. Toast is not a meal, Viv. He set the tray down with exaggerated care. Sebastian would make you eat if he were here. Sebastian is in London testifying at Merrow's trial. He won't be back until tomorrow. Vivienne accepted the tea. But you're right, I should eat. She'd testified 3 weeks ago. Watched Merrow's face as the evidence mounted. Bribery, fraud, conspiracy, extortion. He'd tried to implicate her, claimed she'd forged the ledger, manufactured evidence, seduced the Duke into helping her. No one believed him. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the next day. Sebastian returned late the following afternoon, exhausted but satisfied. It's done. Sentencing came down today. 30 years. He'll die in prison. Vivienne felt the knot in her chest, the one that had lived there for 6 years, finally loosen. Good. There's something else. Sebastian produced a document from his case. The court has officially dissolved all claims Merrow held on you or Julian. Every debt, every contract, every legal filing. You're free, completely free. She took the document, read it twice, then set it down and kissed him until they were both breathless. Thank you, she whispered against his mouth. You did this, all of it. I just provided resources. His hand traced her spine. You're remarkable, you know that? You might have mentioned it once or twice. They'd settled into partnership over the past months, working together, building the network, learning each other's rhythms. The bond was still there, always would be, but Vivienne had learned to distinguish it from her own feelings. And her own feelings were clear. She loved him, bond or no bond, and she'd chosen him, was still choosing him every day. But the formal mating bond, the permanent claiming ritual, that still felt too large, too permanent, too much like surrendering the autonomy she'd only just reclaimed. Sebastian never pushed, never asked, just loved her and worked beside her and trusted her to know her own mind. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Vivienne felt something shift. Sebastian, Tell me about the mating bond again, the ceremony. He went very still. Why? Because I think. She took a breath. I think I might be ready. Not today, not this month, but soon. And I want to understand exactly what I'd be choosing. Sebastian propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. Are you certain? There's no rush. We have time. I know. But I've been thinking about it, about us, about the fact that I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone, that I want to bind my life to yours, not because a bond compels me, but because I choose it. She touched his face. I want the claiming, the permanence, all of it, when I'm ready. When you're ready, he repeated. Not when I want it, not when the pack expects it, when you're ready. Yes. His kiss was reverent, grateful. Then we'll wait as long as you need, and when the time comes, we'll do it right. 3 months later, on a cold spring evening with the full moon rising over the moors, they held the ceremony. It was private. Just the pack, Lady Beatrice, Julian, Mrs. Pruitt, Rowan, and a few trusted friends. Vivienne wore a gown the color of midnight. As Sebastian stood before her in the clearing where pack ceremonies had been held for generations, the ritual was simpler than she'd expected. Vows spoken under moonlight, his hand clasping hers, the alpha's mark, a bite that would scar and mark her as his mate, given with her full consent and witnessed by the pack. And then the bond snapped into place fully, permanently, and Vivienne felt it. His heartbeat echoing in her chest, his presence in her mind, the sense of being fundamentally connected to another person in a way that should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. They ran together that night, Sebastian in wolf form, massive and silver under the moonlight, Vivienne human and laughing as she chased him through the forest, the pack around them, celebrating. She watched in wonder as he moved through the trees, and all power and grace, the wolf as much a part of him as the man. This was what she'd chosen, this wild, impossible, beautiful thing. Later, much later, when they were alone and the moon was setting, Sebastian shifted back to human and pulled her close. No regrets? He asked. None. Vivienne kissed him. I chose this, chose you, and I'd choose it again. I love you, he said. Bond or no bond. Mate or no mate. I love you. I love you too, she smiled. Now and always. The network continued to grow. By the end of the first year, they'd helped over 100 families escape corruption and abuse. Julian thrived, showing a talent for languages and mathematics that had his tutor talking about university someday. The pack accepted her not as an obligation, but as their alpha's true mate, chosen and respected. And Vivian, who'd spent 6 years running, invisible, underestimated, finally had a place where she was seen, valued, and free to be exactly who she was meant to be. A woman who saved others the way she'd once needed saving. A partner to an alpha king. A mate by choice. And that was the greatest victory of all.